For today's critical thought, we're going to be discussing the topic of replayability once again, which is kind of a good point here. Why are certain games and certain designs better at keeping someone coming back for more? And what are the kind of essential elements that need to be changed each time if you want the player to keep returning again, again, and again? With the rise of roguelike and roguelite design, we have seen just an explosion of games from tech builders to bullet heavens to shooters to many more that have all been trying to add replayability. As we talked in an earlier video about kind of the rise and fall of the live service, multiplayer looter, shooter, or schluter, the problem comes with making things that will make the player want to keep coming back to a game. Just telling someone to replay the same maps again and again for 800, 10,000, a million times is not enough to get them interested in this. And it's a common trap from a lot of developers who think that, okay, we'll just procedurally generate everything and then the game will just have infinite replayability. Level design in a procedurally or randomly generated space by itself is not enough to really get someone invested and keep playing. Because it all depends on what the player is doing in said space. If our mission is to find the green acorn, and the green acorn only spawns in a forest, while the player starts a game, it generates a map, and it's city, beach, city, volcano, ice, forest. Well, we already know the answer to this. When we talk about kind of high-level play and what we see in master levels of roguelike and roguelike designs, a lot comes down to either manipulating the RNG by using specific items or understanding what is going on under the hood. If I know, again, that certain rooms or certain room types can spawn a treasure, a secret item, or it's just the right way to go, well, that will oftentimes work every single attempt. One of the issues I ran into with something like Dead Cells was that the level design was perhaps the weakest part of it, despite the fact that the player's actions and the items they find are such a big part of kind of the replayability. Another common misconception is that just by making it really good to move around or making it exciting what the player is doing, that the level generation doesn't need to do much else. But once again, what we see from a lot of these games is that you can have some amazing obstacle designs, some very interesting enemies. But when it's done in kind of the segmented factions, so it goes like... Another trap that we see from a level design standpoint in terms of replayability and proc gen is when the level design is built in this kind of like chunk fashion, or these segments. Okay, so we're going to have this over here, then we have one over here, down there. This is going to be the shop one, this is the boss one, this is the trap one, and you get the picture. Is that while you can stitch things together like this, but if what the player is doing in each kind of chunk is exactly the same, it doesn't matter how you move or rearrange them, it's still going to be the same exact experience. Okay, instead of doing the spinning spike trap first, now we're doing the lava trap. And then we do the slippery room, and then the fire room. And just mixing up that order is not enough when it comes to good level design. A good example of what we want to see is that while the level design is being changed or shifted on each run, what the player is going to be doing or how they're going to be doing this is changing from run to run. So when we talk about something like Hades or the Bind of Isaac, what made them work so well is that there are fixed rooms that you have a really good idea of the type of enemies or type of obstacles you're going to run into in both games. In the Bind of Isaac, you have these fixed elements. There's going to be a treasure room, there's going to be a boss room, there's going to be a shop room. What's inside those rooms is going to be different on each play. It's changing what the player is going to be able to do. And the same goes for Hades and Hades 2, that, okay, maybe this one I get Ares, maybe I get Poseidon, maybe I get Zeus. And those little individual choices will start adding up over the course of a run and making it more interesting, giving the player more choices. And What you want to avoid when it comes to level design and procedural generation is that if it's just there, okay, you procedurally generate every single room, every single tile, every single cabinet. But if all I have to do is run down that hallway and punch the same guy in the face again and again, none of that matters. As I said before, like to paraphrase a quote from a book I read about procedural generation and game design, is that procedural generation is a great way to ruin a game. Proc gen by itself does not make something inherently better. Yes, it's exciting that you can generate 80,000 different bedrooms. What are we doing with those bedrooms? A good example of kind of like that mistake came from the first A Valley Without Wind from Arkham Games. It is a game that procedural generates every single street, cave, building, tower, castle, river. Pick anything in that game other than kind of like the spells and the enemy types, it was procedurally generated. But that level didn't really change again what the player was doing. Yes, you can go into every single building in a town, but if your objective is to just to reach one specific point or fight one specific enemy, none of that is really going to matter. And what the player is doing over and over again is not changing. And when that happens, it just leads to things becoming very repetitive, and oftentimes just leaving them to quit the game out of just sheer boredom. Because telling the player just to do the same exact thing for 1,000 times in a row is not going to be exciting. And even if you do provide some minor layer of meta progression, okay, now you do 1.1% more damage, or you move 0.006% faster, it's not going to be enough to motivate them. And replayability like that can be very hard to grasp, but we finished this video in record time, and I'm sure we won't have to do anything else about it. So as we said in the singer, today's video is all about replayability, and getting someone to keep doing something again and again. And a very important aspect of replayability in this respect is how the player is responding on each and every run. The more ways that you can give the player to experiment or have different builds that can be viable will lead to a healthier experience. What made something like Vampire Survivors work so well is that each item the player picks up, each different perk, is another kind of piece of their build for that specific run. It's never a case of, okay, I can only choose 3 items, and it's the same 3 items every time. Giving the player variety and letting these builds flow in different directions is a great way to get someone invested in replaying a game. In Hades 2 and of course the Binding of Isaac, each individual item the player picks up or boon is a completely different way of impacting their build for said run. Maybe this run you get all fire, maybe this run's all about water, ice, and so on. And while item design or itemization is a big part, one trap you want to avoid is having either too few or too many items. And it's a very hard line to walk. If you're building your game around very specific boss encounters, and those bosses can only be handled in exact ways or specific builds, then you have just completely rendered a lot of your items that don't revolve around those builds completely meaningless. If the final boss is immune to fire, well, any fire item you give the player during a run is inherently worthless. Why should I take fire if the final boss is going to be immune to it? Or if a boss requires you to have 7 specific items, and there's 10,000 items in your game, yes, it's going to be great if you get those 7 items, but how frequent is that going to happen? If you have too few items, and then just falls into, okay, there's 20 items, I'm just going to get the same 20 items each and every single time, then there's no, once again, meaning to replay. If the order is different, you're still getting the same items. Maybe this one will be a little bit easier because you got one item earlier. Maybe this one will be a little bit harder. But at the end of the day, you're just arriving at the same exact endpoint. It's not going to work out for someone. And a good example of how you want items to behave is that you want to avoid kind of one-off items. Okay, you have 50 items. Only one item does direct damage, one item does indirect damage, one item is fire, one item is healing. And we go down that line. Because again, it falls into that issue of if the player needs X to happen, maybe X is increased movement speed, maybe it's better dodge chance, and you don't get that in a run, the player is just not going to be able to do anything. If they feel like the game is out to get them, or the game is just simply not giving them the tools to succeed, or those tools aren't showing up quick enough or reliably enough, they're going to end up being frustrated and quitting. So an example of a game that I really liked that also fell into this trap to some extent was Gloom. Gloom was a kind of Souls-like roguelike that I played, and it had a very limited pool of items. I think it was either 30 or 50 items total in the game. And as you're going to kind of go after the true ending or the secret endings or the extra difficult, super spicy bosses, you need healing. The later balls in that game turn into bullet hell. And unless you are ultra great at the game, you need items that grant you healing. And I think there was only 2 or 3 in the game that did. One was, I think, a weapon that did lifesteal. One was an item that granted you, I think, health on using spells. I think there was one other. So if you don't get those specific items, your run is just basically over. Another big point is when it comes to the concept of damage. A trend that we see in a lot of modern or contemporary roguelike and roguelites today is limiting pure damage. Because if you're dealing with fixed elements, giving the player more damage means they just be able to kill everything faster. So they make the act of getting more damage a lot harder. They'll do stuff like conditionals. Okay, so if you use the ice belt, now all ice damage is multiplied by 25%. If you have an enemy who is hit by water while there's a full moon and the grass is 2 centimeters tall, enemies take 95% more damage. This is something that we saw a lot in both Hades 1 and 2, that there are very few boons and even very few meta upgrades that just give you damage. Just tell you, here's 200% more damage, here's 50% more damage. What they'll always do is attach an conditional to it. So this grants you 50% more fire damage. This grants you more damage if the enemy is bleeding. This one's if they're burning. This one's if they have multiple curses. Now this can work, but the problem is when you have the Isle of Misfit Toys scenario. Okay, I have one fire item, ice, wind, bleed. And my perk is do increase damage when the enemy is, I don't know, poisoned. Okay, that's great. None of this is coming together. And you have to be very careful about how limited the pool of items is going to be. A good example of what we like to see is that instead of having everything tied to one specific role, one item, one role, you design multiple items that can fit within that role. So healing is a popular option. Let's say you have one item that grants you 500 health every second. That sounds really great. Let's say you have another item that grants you 300 health every time you hit an enemy. Another item that grants you health every time someone gets shot by a cannon. Another one you grant health when you summon a pet. Each one of these items fulfills the same role, but it's handled differently. It's meant to work for different builds. And this means that one build is not inherently going to be kind of above everyone else. Yes, it may do something a little bit better, but will also do something a little bit worse. This was the issue that we ran into with something like with Back 4 Blood, where certain builds were just pound for pound better than everything else. Why should I use a sniper rifle that, let's say, I can only get 2 points of health if I headshot an enemy from 30 meters away, or use a melee build where every time I smack an enemy, I gain 50 points of health with 20 points of shield that staggers the enemy and is inherently safer and better to do? And this again gets at the kind of trickier aspect of balancing these kinds of different builds. Builds will always be better or worse. That's just the nature of this design. But you don't want to have something that is just always great, that there is never a reason to not take this item. That can be working on like smaller things, like let's say increase movement speed, increase, interaction speed. But once again, if you have gun that does 80 trillion points of damage versus knife that does 10, there's very few reasons why someone's going to take that knife. And replayability, again, people love when you have these like Omega death builds, where you get the 10 items that let you do penta damage, and each shot turns into a bomb, and each bomb explodes into a nuke, and then the nuke causes massive debuffs, and then when the enemy dies, they explode into another nuke that's a homing exploding nuke. But you want to make sure that every option can work. If you just have one way of winning, or the game is so railroaded that only a few specific builds are going to be successful, and this is again a problem that we see when games add in ascension modes, progressive difficulty, where, okay, 20 points of damage was the average, but now every enemy's health has been multiplied by 20 times. Well, it's not going to work anymore. And your pool of choices becomes smaller and smaller. And this gets at the notion of the engine, or the scale. How does the player win? How do they keep meeting and beating what the game is asking them to do? If one build, let's say, caps out at, I will be able to do at most 200 points of damage, and another build caps out at 10 to the power of 20 damage, one is again going to be better than the other. And it's also why having interesting ways of things interacting or growing is a huge part about replayability. And to that earlier point about why a lot of games today kind of avoid just pure damage, it's exciting to see all this stuff work. The same point goes with Balatro. That it's not just about giving the player, okay, this Joker just multiplies your score by 20 trillion points. No, it's, okay, this Joker multiplies all aces, and then this makes every card count as an ace, and then this says every time you draw 3 aces, you gain 15 multiplier, and then every time you gain a multiplier, you gain 40 more points of bonus. And we just see all the multipliers and cards go up and up and up, and the little fire on your number starts going, which is, again, like just pure dopamine for playing that game. And when it comes to choices, again, people will take the path of least resistance. It's amazing to create this 50 card or 50 plan super strategy that's going to work if you get all 50 of them. Well, what about this strategy that only takes 3? Which one is the player going to do? Which one will be more viable to happen? Because as we said, just having more stuff doesn't automatically make your game better or more replayable. The beauty of the Binding of Isaac is that there is a ton of items, and many of those items are just kind of duplicates of one another. This item gives you 5 points of damage. This item gives you 5 points of damage. This slows enemies. This slows enemies. This gives you more health. This gives you more health. And items can kind of multiply their effects. And the reason why Edmund did like that because he knew the chance of someone getting every single item exactly the same time, or every single play, is not going to happen. So by having these duplicates, he can be at least somewhat assured that the chance of someone getting an item or getting something they need is going to happen. Maybe this run is all about attack speed. Maybe this is all just about damage. Maybe it's all about bombs. Maybe it's all about multi-penta quadruple blasts. How the player gets to the end is a key part about replayability. you want that path to be and feel different each time. Ideally, you want the player to have different ways of success. So if they see that the item that they like doesn't spawn, they're not going to immediately restart and keep doing it until they get that item. They want to be assured that maybe this run, it's again going to be this, nail biter down to the wire win. Or maybe this run is just, I walk in a room, hit fire, everything explodes immediately. With that, we can wrap things up about replayability for this video. So welcome to this video about replayability. Now, an important point that keeps people coming back is what is the player actually doing? Run by run, level by level, map by map. And some of the more engaging multiplayer and replayable experiences have done this in a way that it makes it so that while the player is technically doing the same thing, they're controlling the character the same way, what is happening mission by mission, run by run, whatever, is constantly changing. A good example of an early version of this is the director idea from Left 4 Dead. The idea that some unseen force is determining where enemies show up, which rooms will be accessible, where items and important stuff is going to be, is a great idea. The problem that the director ran into is that there's not enough levers to pull. As anyone who's watched when Thorn and I play Left 4 Dead, we have gotten to the point that that game is just completely mapped out. We know pretty much exactly where items are going to spawn. Yes, maybe there's a med kit in this room. Maybe next time there's going to be a pipe bomb over there. But we already have a good idea of where everything's going to be. We know where enemies can show up. We have a pretty solid chance of dealing with a tank almost anywhere at any time. And even though the game can throw a horde at a different time, or a tank or a witch at a different time, it's not enough to change once someone is great at the game. There's no additional modifiers or anything that is changing what our objective is going to be. Okay, this time we go left. This time we go right. We're still heading to the same spot. Maybe it takes a minute. Maybe it takes 20 seconds. Now this was kind of the point of having the different mutations or game modifiers. But it's again simply just window dressing to what the player is going to be doing run by run. What we saw in kind of this evolution is having both mission or mission objective and map variety kind of combine into one. An example of this would be stuff like with the Helldivers games, where your mission is going to be different. You choose different mission objectives, and then the map will be procedurally generated or randomly generated around that. So you're not given a strict course of what's going to happen on a mission. Maybe this time there is some big boss. Maybe this time there's an event that's going to happen. And events or special modifiers like this is a really important boon when it comes to replayability. That being able to change in either small or large ways how missions are going to work is a powerful tool that designers have used so that if, let's say, the mission objective does remain the same, go to this room, pick up this key, get this jewel, but this time, all the enemies are extra dangerous. This time, the map is flooded. This time, there's electro bugs flying around that zap you. It adds charm and adds replayability. What you want to avoid in this respect is when those modifiers are too kind of powerful. So this was the point that we had with Back 4 Blood. That the special or the infected cards or the mutation cards, there is a huge difference in terms of how nasty one of these cards can get. Okay, this run, enemies are faster. Not that big of a deal. On this run, those giant guys that can grab you are now doubly fast. They have extra armor, so headshots don't count. Every time they hit you, you take bleed damage. And also, it's now completely dark, and you can only see 2 feet in front of you. Oh, and every enemy is now invisible. Have fun. I don't think they actually did invisible, but let me know they actually put that one in. You want modifiers to mix things up, but you want to avoid to be so annoying or so frustrating that the player just says, I am not doing that. Keep refreshing, keep re-saying, we're getting a different one. The joy of having like seasonal or themed mutations or modifiers is one of the better aspects of live service design, and again, why a game like Deep Rock Galactic has been such a popular mainstay of co-op and replayable games. It is a game that, again, you are still doing the same objectives on very similar maps. But having these mutations or these different events that change what can show up and make things feel different, it's exciting. And again, it gets at that point that there has to be something that is pushing the player or forcing them to do something different. There has to be some element that requires a player to think differently on this play versus this play versus this play. Because if there's not, it's not going to get someone to keep playing the game. Even if you have very tantalizing late game or long game meta play. Okay, if you play this game for 800 runs, you'll get the neon green shotgun. Or maybe now you can do a 1/2 high jump. If you're going to do meta play as a form of progression in this respect, it cannot just be about making the player more and more powerful, because A, you're going to run out of ideas eventually, and B, the player will eventually grow so powerful that the game is not going to be challenging. Okay, I'm now do 80,000 points of damage, but all the enemies still have 1,000 points of health. Wow, it's going to be that much of a challenge. This was one of the reasons why I just kind of fell out of love of the later Diablo games, where the end game just turned into just get more number. There's no new strategy attached to it. There's nothing new I'm doing. It's just get more number. Make that sword do 10 billion damage, and then 10 gazillion, and then 10 quintillion damage. But I'm still just doing the same thing. There has to, again, be something that is changing how the player is responding to the game. If there isn't, it doesn't matter how much meta play, doesn't matter how many numbers you have, it's just going to end up frustrating and boring someone very fast. Welcome to our video discussing replayability. It is a very essential form of keeping someone invested and having them just keep coming back again and again, and I think we may have done this already, haven't we? To wrap things up for our video, replayability is all about giving the player something new that is going to change how they experience a game each and every time they play it. Just pure same exact thing here versus same exact thing here is not going to be interesting to them. Even with competitive games that are oftentimes built on very fixed actions or very fixed choices, those choices matter greatly. Having different players on your team or different champions in a MOBA is going to radically change the flow of that combat. Yes, what the player is doing on a match is going to be the same, but how you deal with specific champions, what items you're going to choose, is where things are going to differ. And it's, again, why people play these games day in and day out. When we see replayability fail is when developers think that just the act of playing this game again and again is enough to keep them invested. You're still doing the same exact thing. Or there's just not enough in terms of progression or change. Okay, on the highest difficulty, everything will just one-shot you. Okay, but you're still doing the same thing. And if everything one-shots you and you have maps that are just completely open air where there's no cover whatsoever, a lot of people don't want to play something that just feels inherently worse. They'll stick to the lower difficulties. And if it feels like the only way is to play the game until the meta progression helps them, a lot of people aren't going to play the game while it's bad to get to the point when it's good. For you watching this, what do you think are some of the best examples of replayability in a single player, or multiplayer, or live service game? And as an extra special challenge, can you think of other examples of a multiplayer experience, let's say it's either match-based or mission-based, that did a great job of keeping people coming back for more that we haven't discussed yet in this video? But with that, enjoy all the loops and the time travel, and I'll see everyone for another design topic coming real soon.